I hope that all of you have been blessed this past week as I have been. This past week truly has been such a huge blessing and a challenge as well. But there is blessing in the challenge. This past week we had our special early morning prayer rally, and it's been a joy to hear about the path of faith, the path of Abraham. The path of faith, the path of Abraham. And we've been hearing from our pastor emeritus. We've been very blessed by his message, but we also had the chance, and I think this was such a good idea. I don't know who came up with it, but it was such a good idea. We had a chance to hear from other pastors, not just our pastor, of course, but other pastors who came here and saw and experienced the transformative power of prayer. And they didn't just keep that energy, that feeling locked up within them, but they went back to their home countries and they spread the word. They let other people know to share in this blessing, and they saw that power multiplied in their home countries. Hearing about this was such a huge blessing. And sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that we have a monopoly on God's power, that this is the center of God's universe. But there are many locations on earth where God is moving in mighty ways. And so we heard about how God is moving like a mighty rushing wind in Taiwan and in Indonesia, where Pastor Lin and Pastor Christopher, they came here and learned about the power of prayer at Myungsung Church, but carried that tradition back with them and saw their churches just explode with the Holy Spirit, not just in numbers, but in spirituality, in spiritual maturity. And, the Bible tells us that the people of God are not called to be prisoners of our past mistakes. That's a very important message in the Bible. We are not prisoners of our past mistakes. But also, we are called not to be content, not to take pride in our past success either. Because we know that there is more, that our God has more in store for us, that our God is not just the God of yesterday and today, but he is also the God of tomorrow. That we believe in Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday and today and forever. Amen. It was a blessing to me. It filled me with joy, truly, to see the many ways in which our Awake Ministries family members, we are a part of Myungsung Church, but we do have our own special identity, right? Our own special brand. And so it was a blessing to me to see all of our Awake Ministry members serving throughout the church this past week. And of course, we had not just one, because that would be too easy, but we had two special praises that we had to perform this past week. And the one that we performed on Thursday for Sambu, I heard from someone that it was a little 아까워. There weren't enough people there that they want to do it again. So gauging from that reaction, I think maybe it's true. So maybe we'll set something up to do that song again in the future. But we had those two performances. We also had our Awake Ministries representatives leading the scripture reading on Friday at the first service, which is 4:50 a.m. To get up that early and get dressed, and our konsanim, you have to put makeup on, right? And wear the hanbok. It's truly thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And for myself and Pastor Sean Hagyung-su Jonsanim, we worked translating the manuscript from Korean to English every night. And some days we didn't receive it until way past midnight, the final version. We were waiting and waiting and waiting, right? It came very late sometimes. But once again, through this I was blessed. Being able to really study the word closely is different from just sitting there and listening, right? And to get a preview of that next morning's message was a huge blessing as well. But I also, again, had a renewed sense of appreciation for our sermon translation team who works here every single week. Many of you are holding the manuscript of my sermon in English and in Korean. Obviously, I don't write Korean that well, So that is all done by our team every single week. And sometimes, my manuscript is very late too on Saturday night, but every week they do it without complaining, and they do such a fabulous job. And even besides all of those, there might be someone here thinking, well, I work too, you didn't recognize me, but there are so many different departments that we are serving in, right? So many different ways that our Awake Ministries members are working and serving, and perhaps you are unseen and unheard by the people around you, unrecognized, but we know that our God sees and our God hears everything that we have done in His service. So truly, once again, thank you. And although there are many different departments and different ministries that we are serving in, this past week, I spent the most time working closely with those of our members who were serving in the International Prayer Conference, the IPC. And truly it was a remarkable experience. We had 5 of the 7 continents of the earth represented. Think about that. Next year, I think we should shoot for 7 continents, 7 out of 7. So we need to invite an Australian and the penguin, right? And then we'll have all 7 represented. But truly it was a magnificent, remarkable experience. Some of the attendees of this conference traveled over 50 hours by plane. A couple months ago I talked about traveling over 30 hours to go to Brazil, but this, it's adding another day onto that, right? So truly the lengths that they went to come here to sit and listen and learn truly is amazing. And many of our members, they gave their dedication, their hard work for these volunteers. They spent the entire week helping to host these domestic and foreign church leaders and pastors. And today, most people in the church, I see a sense of relief on their faces that the prayer rally is over, but our team is still going strong, and our foreign church leaders, they still have things on the agenda. They're here for a couple more days. So they're still working while we're starting to relax now. They're still at work. And we believe that we do this for a purpose. We believe that God is raising up the next generation of church leaders. That we will see a church like Myungsung Church rising up out of India, out of Nepal, out of Kenya, out of Paraguay, out of Bolivia, out of all of these countries that attended. We believe that God is planting seeds there, and that is why we do what we do. For myself, I came to our church, this church, just before a September special early morning prayer rally. Just before Tukse, that was when I came, and like many of our guests, I was still very jet lagged. I was half asleep. I was in a daze. I didn't know what was going on. They told me that the service started at 6 a.m. So, trying to be, as 부지런해 as possible, diligent. I said, I'll get there at 5:30, 30 minutes early, right? How impressive would that be? And I got there at 5:30, and people were already lined up down the block, waiting to get inside, waiting to get a good seat, to try to get just a little bit closer, right, to the altar, to receive just a little more blessing. And for me, that really gave me a new sense. It gave me a new sense of what it meant to desire God, what it meant to worship God earnestly with all our hearts, with all of our sincerity, right? All of our attention, all of our focus, to worship God like that. And it's been a year now since I came here to Korea, right? So it's been exactly 1 year. But it still moves me to see such things. And, this past week I was walking with one of the guest speakers of our conference. We were walking in, and it was about 5:15 a.m. and he saw the line. And I saw from his reaction, he had the same reaction that I had. He said, why are these people here? And I said, they're waiting to get in. They're waiting to get in. It's such a blessing to see and experience all of this firsthand. And for me now, having been a year here in Korea, and I haven't been able to go home yet, I'm starting to miss a lot of things. I'm starting to crave a lot of things from back home. and mostly it's food, because I love food. Of course, like any good New Yorker, I dearly miss my neighborhood pizza shop and bagel shop. If you ask any New Yorker what the best pizza and best bagel is in New York, almost all of them will tell you it's the one that they grew up next to, right? Their neighborhood shop. I miss the pizza, I miss the bagels. I also grew up in a neighborhood with a very large Indian population. So I really, really miss Indian food. I was talking with my Indian friends here. I miss the biryani and samosa and vindaloo and naan. Can't wait to go back home and try some of that again. But one of the things that I miss the most, that I find quite difficult to get around here, is American breakfast food. American breakfast food. One of the most famous franchise breakfast restaurants in America is IHOP. You may have heard of it. IHOP with its blue arched roof, right? And IHOP stands for the International House of Pancakes. The International House of Pancakes. But it's not very international, it's very American. And if you go into IHOP, you can get breakfast food anytime you want. You can go and get pancakes, waffles, toast, omelets, bacon, hash browns, sausages, or because it's America, you can have fried chicken for breakfast. Or you can even have a steak for breakfast. Or again, because it's America, you can have a fried steak for breakfast. 24 hours a day, whenever you want, you can go into IHOP and get this breakfast food. But if you go to Kansas City, there's actually a very special IHOP location. And this one doesn't serve any pancakes, it doesn't have any waffles or any of that, no fried steaks. But it serves prayer. It serves up praise, and it does this 24 hours a day. And it's the International House of Prayer, IHOP, the International House of Prayer. And they founded this in 1999. And so for the past 20 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, without stopping even once in the past 20 years, they pray and they worship nonstop. They take 2-hour shifts and continue this prayer and worship nonstop. But the good news is that you don't have to book a plane ticket to go all the way to Kansas City to visit IHOP. Not just because their services are on the internet, but because God's house is not in Kansas City. That is a house, but it is not the house. God's house is not in Kansas City. It is not at the top of Mount Sinai or Mount Hermon. It is not located in Jerusalem or Samaria. But God's house of prayer is located wherever God's people are, wherever they gather together and pray and worship together. That is God's house of prayer. Where we are right now is God's house of prayer. You are all on holy ground. Holy ground. How many of you have taken your shoes off? I took my shoes off. You're on holy ground right now. On holy ground. God's house of prayer is right here. What we have built here is God's house of prayer, and we are continuing to build God's house of prayer going forward. This is the Myungil branch of God's international house of prayer, his IHOP, Myungil-Dong, right here, what we have built and what we continue to build. That is the message of Isaiah. And if we look at Isaiah, I think it's amazing, because when we read this book, it's remarkable in its prophecy and vision, especially considering how open-minded it is, how outwardly focused the message is. Because most of the Bible that we're used to reading, especially in the Old Testament, is focused inward. It's focused on Israel and God's people of Israel. But Isaiah is looking outside those walls, outside those boundaries, and saying that God has a plan for all people, all nations, on earth. If we read in Isaiah 49, it says there, "It is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore only the tribes of Jacob and bring back only those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light to the Gentiles, to all the nations, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." God's international house of prayer is not closed off. It is not reserved only for a certain group born to a certain set of parents, but it is open. It is open. The vision that God gave to Isaiah was that of an open table where all people could come together and feast and have fellowship, even during a time of famine. It was a vision of an open house where people could come and find rest and refuge from the storm outside. That was the God-given vision to Isaiah. And I think this is shown to us most clearly in the two groups that Isaiah mentions by name. First of all, he mentions the eunuchs, and he says that if they keep the Sabbath holy, if they desire what is pleasing to God, and they remain steadfast in God's covenant promise, that they will be given a memorial and a name that is better than sons and daughters, an everlasting name that will endure forever. If we look at eunuchs and their place in society, eunuchs were servants or sometimes slaves, but they had a very special place. They served a very special purpose in society. I found out there were eunuchs in Korea during the Joseon dynasty as well, and they were known as Daeshi, right? They were in the Daeshibu. And eunuchs, if you look throughout history, they had a wide variety of tasks that they were in charge of. And it could range from basic things like just serving food, all the way up to administering the entire household for their master, right? They were second in command to their master. And I found there are even historical examples of eunuchs serving as regent, serving as ruler over an entire country when the heir to the throne was underage. So if the next king, the next one in line, was too young, a eunuch would step in and rule the entire country. So eunuchs, we might think of them as a lowly position, but they could occupy even the highest positions of power. But there was one thing that eunuchs could not do. By nature of them being a eunuch, due to the process of making them a eunuch, right? They couldn't have children. They couldn't have a family of their own. And so they could not have an heir. They could not have any offspring. They could not continue their line. So when God makes this promise to them, it's a very pointed promise. It's hitting them where it hurts, right? Because God is promising them something that they really cannot have. God tells them, you will receive something better than sons and daughters. I know what hurts you. I know that hole you have in your life, but I will fulfill it. Something even better than sons, better than daughters. Your names cannot live on through your children and their children's children, but I will give you an eternal and everlasting name that will endure forever. Your line will not die out with you. And not only to the eunuchs, but also to the Gentiles as well. This same promise was open to them. Any foreigner, God says, that attaches themselves to the Lord, who loves his name and serves faithfully, who keeps the Sabbath and holds fast to the covenant, to these faithful Gentiles, they would be brought to God's holy mountain. They would be given joy in God's house of prayer. And most importantly, it says, their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. We have to understand how important this is for God to say that, because all throughout Israelite history, both before and after Isaiah, the temple was closed off to the Gentiles. Anyone reading Isaiah as a God-fearing, Torah-keeping Jew, if you read Isaiah, you would think he was crazy. Because he's talking about something that had never happened before and did not happen after he had died as well. The temple was closed off to the Gentiles. They could only go into the outer ring of the temple, into the outer yard, aptly named the court of the Gentiles. That was the only place they were allowed to go. They weren't allowed to go any further, any deeper than that. And if you look at a diagram of the temple, you can Google it later. Look at a diagram of the temple. It's very clear. It's very clearly outlined where people could and could not go. And it's almost like a maze. There's all these walls and layers of the temple. And it is only deep within the inner circles of the temple that the altar was located, where only the priests could go and offer up these sacrifices. So you can imagine if you had to give directions to someone trying to get from the court of the Gentiles to the altar, you'd have to tell them, go there, past this wall, make a left, make a right, go up the steps, through another wall, through another door, through that gate, up the steps, up the ramp, and then you will find the altar. It was so far separated from them that they could not even see it. They could not even catch a glimpse of this altar. But when God speaks through Isaiah and he says that these Gentiles will be brought to his holy mountain, welcomed into his house, that they could enter into that sacred space and bring their offerings on this altar, this is a huge statement. God is breaking down those walls. He is breaking down those boundaries. He is cutting away the velvet rope, clearing away the metal barricades that had prevented people from coming to God, that had prevented access to them. Because God was not just the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That was too simple a thing. He was the God of all creation, all nations, all people. God's international house of prayer is open to all who will come. To all who will come. The Gentiles were being invited into a place where they had never been welcomed before, where they had never been allowed to enter before. And this vision was fulfilled in its entirety upon the cross. That is where it finds its fulfillment. Because it says, with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. We are all here today. We are standing on this holy ground because of this vision, because of this promise. None of us here were born a Jew, unless I'm mistaken. If anyone here was born a Jew, I apologize. But I believe that none of us here were born as a Jew. And to be a Jew, actually, your mother must be a Jew. It doesn't matter who your father is. But your mother must be a Jew. Your father could be someone else. But even that criterion we cannot meet. None of us are naturally born into God's family. But we are adopted. God's house is still open to us. God's table is open to us. And all of this is by grace. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God. So as those who have received this free gift of grace, we have to ask, what is our calling? Our calling is to build up God's house of prayer. And how can we do that? How can we build up God's house of prayer? As our pastor emeritus has been covering in his sermons for this past week, Abraham was a man who received a great amount of blessing. When we think of Abraham, we think of blessing. He received great blessing, but central to the promise of blessing from God, there was a command to do something more. Not just to receive, but also to give. If we read in Genesis chapter 12, which was the central passage for this past week, it says, I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. Most people, we like to just stop after we read, I will bless you. We say, thank you, God. But God says, I will bless you and you will be a blessing, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. We are not just called to be blessed. We are given the command to be a blessing to others. We are a conduit of God's blessing, a channel of God's blessing, a highway to God's blessing, because God's blessing flows into this world through God's people. Just to conclude for today, I think we can think of it in terms of math. When we think of most new Christians, or maybe immature Christians, they see themselves and their faith as just a point, a single dot. X and Y coordinates. We all remember learning this in school, X and Y. It's just a single dot of X and Y coordinates. This is the exact location where they were blessed, where they received this free gift. And that is the exact location where they will stay. They will not move from that place. This is the servant in the parable of the talents, or the minas, that buries the gold they were given. They buried the gold that they were given because they just wanted to safeguard what they had. They didn't want to take any risk. They just wanted to preserve just the little amount that they had been given. And so they do not move because there is risk in moving from this one point, in moving out into the unknown. They stay safe inside that one point of X and Y. For those who may have spent more time in the faith, whose faith is a little more developed, a little more mature, they move forward from this point. They don't just stay in that point, they move forward. But only to a certain extent. This is called a line segment, right? From one point to one point, and then it stops. They move from that one set point and stop at another set point. They take the blessing that they have been given and they go out, they multiply it, they make it fruitful, but only to a certain limit, only to a certain point. They can do more, but they choose not to. I believe that as spiritual children of Abraham, that we are called to do something more than that we are called to be something more than that. Because the children of God in Abraham, what we are meant to be is a ray. A ray. And a ray is a line that starts at a set point, but it goes on forever with no end. It continues on forever with no end. It goes out into the unknown. It goes out to infinity. Because we are called to be blessed, but that blessing does not remain within us. We are called to go out with that blessing, to go out into the world, to go out into the nations and carry that blessing forth with us. The blessing does not remain within us, but it pours out of us. It pours out of us. That is our calling, to build up God's house. And we build up God's house when we continue to open it up and we continue to make it accessible to others. I believe that through works like the special early morning prayer rally and the International Prayer Conference, we are continuing to build up God's international house of prayer. Because we believe in a God that can take a eunuch and provide even them with a name that will continue, a name that is better than sons and daughters, that will endure forever. Our God is the God who can open the way for the Gentiles to enter into the holy place, to sacrifice on an altar that had been inaccessible to them before. We believe in a God of miracles, a God of mighty works, who provides life where there was only death, water where there was only a desert, who opens a way where there was no way. Our God is a God who can divide by zero, who can make something out of nothing. This is the God of Abraham that we follow. on the path of faith, the God of Abraham, the path of Abraham. It is our God who will give us joy in this house of prayer. So let us pray together at this time.